In the pre-dawn darkness of April 7, 1945, Captain Masao Tsuyaga tightens his leather flight gloves inside the cramped cockpit of his Ki-84 Hayate fighter, the most advanced aircraft in the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force arsenal. At Chofu Airfield, 20 miles west of Tokyo, he can hear what has become the soundtrack of Japan's slow death, the distant rumble of American B-29 superfortresses approaching from the south. But something is different this morning. Tsuyaga's radio crackles with voices he's never heard before. Not the usual calm coordination of interceptor squadrons, but confusion, panic even. Unknown fighters. Silver aircraft approaching from the southeast. The veteran pilot's blood turns to ice. Southeast? That's impossible. He's been flying combat missions for 3 years. He's faced everything America has thrown at the Empire. P-38 Lightnings over the Philippines. F-6F Hellcats from carrier raids, even the new F-4U Corsairs at Okinawa. But those encounters happened near American bases or aircraft carriers. Here, over the heart of Japan itself, 650 miles from the nearest American-held island, Japanese fighters have always ruled supreme. His ground crew chief, Sergeant Yamamoto, pounds frantically on the side of his cockpit. "Captain! Emergency scramble. Unknown fighters approaching Tokyo." Tsuyaga's mind races through impossible calculations. The Americans captured Iwo Jima 5 weeks ago, but that volcanic speck is still 675 miles away. No fighter aircraft in the world has that kind of range. It defies physics. It defies logic. It defies everything he knows about aerial warfare. As his Nakajima Ha-45 engine coughs to life, Tsuyaga catches a glimpse of silver glinting in the distance. Not the familiar dark silhouettes of carrier-based fighters, but something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. "All units, scramble immediately." The urgent command crackles through his headphones. Unidentified fighters over central Tokyo. Racing down the runway, Tsuyaga feels a knot forming in his stomach. In 3 years of combat, 3 years of watching his friends die, 3 years of watching the Empire shrink, he's never heard such panic in ground control's voice. As his Ki-84 lifts off concrete still damp with morning dew and climbs toward 15,000 feet, one terrifying question echoes in his mind. How did American fighters get all the way to Tokyo? What Captain Tsuyaga doesn't know, what no Japanese pilot could possibly comprehend in this moment, is that he's about to witness a revolution in aerial warfare. A technological breakthrough that will shatter everything he believes about range, endurance, and what's possible in fighter aircraft design. The silver aircraft streaking toward Japan's capital represent not just a new airplane, but the death knell of Japanese air superiority over their own homeland. The age of the P-51 Mustangs' very long-range missions has just begun, and nothing will ever be the same. Act 2. The Laws of Physics. To understand the shock coursing through Captain Tsuyaga's veins, you have to grasp what every Japanese pilot knew about fighter aircraft in April 1945. Not opinion, not hope, mathematical certainty. Every fighter they'd ever encountered followed the same immutable laws of physics. More range meant less performance. More fuel meant fewer weapons. Longer missions meant sitting ducks limping home on empty tanks. This wasn't theory, it was scripture. The Japanese themselves had mastered this cruel equation. Their legendary A6M0 achieved its famous range by sacrificing everything else. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, no pilot protection. The result was a fighter that could fly enormous distances but died in flames from a single well-placed burst. Japanese pilots had a name for it. Tobu Hitsugi, the flying coffin. American fighters represented the opposite philosophy. The P-47 Thunderbolt packed 8.50 caliber machine guns and could absorb punishment that would obliterate a zero. Pilots called it the Jug because it felt like flying an indestructible milk bottle. But its combat radius barely exceeded 300 miles. Even with external tanks, it couldn't escort bombers deep into enemy territory. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning offered better range, stretching to 450 miles with drop tanks. But it required bases relatively close to its targets, and in a turning fight, experienced Japanese pilots could exploit its size and weight. This fundamental limitation had given Japanese home defense a crucial strategic advantage. As long as American fighters couldn't reach the Japanese mainland, The Empire's experienced pilots could focus entirely on destroying unescorted bombers. Every B-29 crew flying over Japan knew they were on their own once they crossed the coastline. Alone at 30,000 feet. Alone in the flak. Alone against fighters that could climb, attack, withdraw, refuel, and attack again. The mathematics were brutal. A B-29 cruised at 230 miles per hour. A Japanese fighter could hit 400 miles per hour in a dive. Do the math. The bombers were target practice. Lieutenant Akira Watanabe, scrambling from Haneda Airfield in his Ki-61 Haiyan, had built his entire tactical doctrine around this reality. The Americans come in fat and slow, he told his wingman just 2 days earlier. Their fighters turn back at the coast. That's when we strike. He had 17 confirmed kills, 16 of them B-29s. At 0647 hours, climbing through 12,000 feet in formation with 5 other Japanese fighters, Watanabe spots them first. A formation of sleek silver aircraft diving toward the massive Nakajima aircraft factory at Musashino. But something's wrong with what he's seeing. These aren't bombers. They're single-engine fighters, and they're moving with the aggressive confidence of aircraft operating from their home base. Not the cautious fuel conservation of long-range intruders, but the predatory hunting pattern of fighters with time and fuel to spare. "Control, this is Lightning 3, Watanabe radios using his call sign. His voice is steady, but his hand trembles on the stick. "I count 15, no, 20 single-engine fighters attacking the Musashino plant. Type unknown." The radio explodes with confused chatter, Japanese pilots across the Tokyo area reporting the same impossible sight. American fighters operating with impunity over the heart of Japan, conducting precision attacks hundreds of miles from any known base. Captain Tomojiro Ogawa, leading the 103rd Sentai from Kosa Airfield, has 25 victories to his credit. He's fought Americans in the Philippines, over Okinawa, and in dozens of home defense missions. He knows their aircraft, knows their tactics, knows their limitations. But as he closes to 1,000 yards on a formation of the mysterious silver fighters, he realizes he's looking at something completely new. The aircraft are beautiful in a deadly way. All clean lines and purposeful design. The elliptical wings remind him of the British Spitfire, but the nose is longer, more aggressive. The overall impression is of a thoroughbred racehorse bred for one purpose: speed. Most unsettling of all, they carry large external fuel tanks under their wings, yet they're maneuvering like aircraft at the beginning of a mission, not fuel-starved stragglers at the end of an impossible journey. "Impossible," Ogawa mutters into his oxygen mask. "Those drop tanks should be empty by now." What Ogawa doesn't realize, what he cannot possibly comprehend, is that he's witnessing the culmination of American industrial and technological genius. The marriage of North American Aviation's P-51 Mustang airframe with British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine technology, optimized for impossible range. These silver aircraft have flown over 675 miles from Iwo Jima. They've fought a high-intensity air battle over Tokyo, and they still have enough fuel to make it home. The P-51D Mustang's internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons, combined with two 108-gallon external tanks, and the Merlin V-1650's remarkable fuel efficiency has created something the Japanese never imagined possible: a fighter with a combat radius exceeding 850 miles. Total range, 1,650 miles. Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, diving his Ki-84 toward the American formation, feels his worldview beginning to crumble. If they can reach Tokyo, he thinks, nowhere in Japan is safe. We can't even run. Act 3. Democracy Made Wings. The story of how American fighters arrived over Tokyo begins not in the Pacific, but in a wind tunnel in Inglewood, California. In 1940, as Europe burned and Japan marched through China, a team of North American aviation engineers faced an impossible deadline. The British desperately needed a new fighter. Their Spitfires were magnificent but took too long to build. Their Hurricanes were obsolescent. And the Luftwaffe was winning. The British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with an urgent request: build P-40 Warhawks under license. Now. James Dutch Kindleberger, NAA's president, made a counter-proposal that seemed insane. "Give us 120 days," he said. "We'll design you something better." The British thought he was mad. Nobody designed a fighter from scratch in 120 days. It took years, careful analysis, endless testing. Kindleberger bet his company he could do it in 4 months. What emerged from NAA's design studios was revolutionary. The NA-73X prototype featured a laminar flow wing, a radical design that reduced drag by maintaining smooth airflow over the wing surface. The fuselage was sculpted around the engine like a glove, minimizing drag. Every rivet, every panel line, every surface was optimized for speed and efficiency. But the original Allison engine limited the aircraft's high-altitude performance. The early P-51s were good, not great. Fast at low altitude but gasping for air above 15,000 feet, where combat increasingly happened. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. British test pilots who flew the early Mustangs had an idea. What if you married North American's brilliant airframe with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine? The same power plant that made Spitfires legendary? The marriage was made in engineering heaven. The Packard-built Merlin P-1650, producing 1,695 horsepower with a 2-stage supercharger, transformed the Mustang from good to legendary. Suddenly, the aircraft could fight at 40,000 feet. It could outrun anything the Germans or Japanese flew, and most critically, it could fly farther than any single-engine fighter in history. The Merlin's fuel efficiency was extraordinary. While other fighters burned through their tanks in desperate gasps, the Merlin sipped fuel with British restraint. Combined with the Mustang's aerodynamic perfection, the result was range that seemed impossible. But range alone wasn't enough. The P-51D needed to fight when it got there. 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, 3 per wing, each carrying 400 rounds. Total ammunition, 2,400 rounds, enough for nearly 3 minutes of sustained fire, an eternity in aerial combat where most kills happened in 3-second bursts. The guns were mounted in the wings, spread wide for maximum coverage. Converged at 300 yards, they created a cone of destruction that shredded anything caught in its path. Veteran pilots called it 50 caliber justice. As P-51Ds rolled off production lines in California and Texas, one question consumed American strategic planners. How far could these magnificent machines really fly? The answer would rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. Act 4. The Bloody Rock. February 19, 1945, Iwo Jima. The volcanic island looked like hell's preview, 8 square miles of ash, sulfur, and death. The beaches weren't sand. They were volcanic cinders that swallowed landing craft and trapped Marines like quicksand. Mount Suribachi loomed over everything, a dormant volcano turned fortress. 22,000 Japanese defenders waited in tunnels and caves. They had no illusions about victory. Their orders were simple: make the Americans pay in blood for every yard. They succeeded beyond Tokyo's darkest hopes. The battle for Iwo Jima would become the only Pacific engagement where American casualties exceeded Japanese. In 36 days of fighting, 6,821 Americans died. Another 19,217 were wounded. The volcanic ash drank blood like rain. But American planners needed Iwo Jima, desperately. Not for its beauty, there was none. Not for its resources, it had none. They needed it for one reason: geography. Iwo Jima sat 675 miles south of Tokyo, halfway between the Marianas and the Japanese homeland. Close enough to change everything. Close enough for fighter escorts. The B-29 raids from the Marianas were bleeding. Without fighter protection, the superfortresses faced Japanese interceptors alone. Some missions saw loss rates exceeding 5%. At that attrition rate, the air campaign would collapse before Japan did. Iwo Jima would save the bomber crews. But first, it had to be taken. As Marines died on the beaches, Seabees were already surveying for airfields. Before the island was secured, before the last Japanese defenders were killed or captured, construction crews were grading runways. They worked under fire, bulldozers sporting armor plating, operators wearing helmets and flak jackets. By March 4th, with fighting still raging in the north, The first emergency B-29 landed on Iwo's partly completed runway. The bomber was shot to pieces, trailing smoke, carrying wounded men who would have died without this volcanic rock. That emergency landing justified the island's cost. Every man who fought there, every life lost. Because the B-29 that landed safely carried 11 crew members who would have drowned in the Pacific without Iwo Jima's runways. By April 1st, P-51 Mustangs began arriving. The 7th Fighter Command, the 15th, 21st, and 506th Fighter Groups brought their silver birds to this hellish island. Pilots lived in tents on volcanic ash. They breathed sulfur fumes. They watched the ocean spray over their aircraft, corroding metal faster than maintenance crews could prevent. But they were 675 miles closer to Tokyo. Major Robert W. Moore, leading the 15th Fighter Group's 45th Squadron, stood on Iwo's newly completed runway and did the math. With internal tanks and two 108-gallon drop tanks, his P-51D carried 400 gallons of fuel. The Merlin engine consumed roughly 68 gallons per hour at cruise settings. Tokyo was 675 miles north. Round trip, 1,350 miles. At cruising speed of 290 miles per hour, that's 4.6 hours of flight time. Times 68 gallons per hour equals 313 gallons consumed. That left 87 gallons, more than an hour, for combat. The numbers checked. The mission was possible, barely. Moore gathered his pilots in a tent that smelled of sulfur and canvas. "Gentlemen, on April 7th, we're going to Tokyo." The room fell silent. Every pilot knew the distance, knew the risk, knew what they were being asked to do. "The Japanese think we can't reach them," Moore continued. "They've built their entire defensive strategy around that assumption. Tomorrow, we're going to prove them wrong." Act 5. The Longest Morning. April 7th, 1945, 0530 hours, Iwo Jima. The pre-dawn air tastes of sulfur and ocean spray. Major Robert W. Moore walks the flight line, checking each of the 72 P-51D Mustangs that will make the first very long-range mission to Tokyo. His flashlight beam catches aluminum skin still being polished by ground crews who worked through the night. The Mustangs look like silver ghosts in the darkness. Each carries full ammunition, 2,400 rounds of .50 caliber. Each has been fueled to the brim. 184 gallons internal, plus two 108-gallon drop tanks slung under the wings. Each has been gone over with the obsessive attention of men who know that at 675 miles from home, mechanical failure means death. Moore stops at his own aircraft, nicknamed Texas Ranger. His crew chief, Master Sergeant Bill Harrison, is making a final inspection of the Merlin 51650 engine. "How's she running, Sergeant?" "Like a Swiss watch, sir. She'll get you there and back." "That's the idea." At 0600 hours, the briefing. Moore stands before his pilots in a tent that serves as their squadron ready room. The map behind him shows a thin red line stretching from Iwo Jima to Tokyo. 675 miles. An impossible distance. An impossible mission. "Gentlemen, today we rewrite the rules of aerial warfare." He lets that sink in before continuing. "The B-29s will go in first, hitting targets around Tokyo. The Japanese will scramble everything they have to stop them. That's when we arrive. We won't just escort the bombers. We're going to hunt. We're going to kill. And we're going to show the Japanese that distance no longer protects them." He pauses, looking at faces barely old enough to shave. "Fuel management is critical. We'll cruise at 10,000 feet at 290 miles per hour, the sweet spot for the Merlin's fuel efficiency. Drop external tanks on my command, not before. Once we're over Tokyo, you'll have approximately 1 hour of combat time. Use it wisely." "And if we get hit?" someone asks. "If you can't make Iwo, ditch as close to our picket submarines as possible. The Navy has 16 submarines stationed along our route for rescue operations. But make damn sure you're beyond the Japanese-held islands before you go in the water." At 0645 hours, engines begin starting. The sound is beautiful and terrible. 72 Merlin engines creating a symphony that echoes across Iwo Jima. A roar that speaks of power and possibility. At 0700 hours, Moore lifts off. Behind him, 3 complete fighter groups follow. They form up over the island, circling once, perhaps their last sight of friendly territory, then turn north. Toward Tokyo, toward history. The flight north is a masterclass in fuel management. Moore holds the formation at exactly 10,000 feet. Speed, 290 miles per hour. The Merlin engines purr at cruise settings, each burning 68 gallons per hour, exactly as calculated. Below them, the Pacific stretches in endless blue. Somewhere down there, American submarines wait at designated points, ready to rescue any pilot who has to ditch. It's small comfort. The water temperature is 65 degrees. A pilot can survive maybe 6 hours before hypothermia wins. At 0900 hours, 400 miles from Iwo Jima, Lieutenant James McKinley's voice crackles over the radio. "Lead, this is Blue 4. I've got a fuel leak, losing about 5 gallons a minute from the left drop tank." Moore's mind calculates instantly. 5 gallons a minute times 120 minutes remaining equals 600 gallons lost. McKinley won't make it. "Blue 4, return to base, now." "But sir—" "That's an order, Lieutenant. Turn back before you're beyond gliding distance of the submarine line." McKinley's Mustang banks away, trailing a faint mist of fuel. The formation continues north, 71 fighters now. At 10:15 hours, the first landmark appears. The Izu Islands, volcanic peaks rising from the sea like stepping stones to Japan. The formation is now 500 miles from Iwo Jima, 175 miles from Tokyo, still well within Japanese-controlled airspace, still no enemy contact. At 10:35 hours, Mount Fuji appears on the horizon. The sacred mountain rises 12,388 feet, its snow-capped peak stark against the morning sky. Japanese pilots navigate by Fuji. American bomber crews use it as a landmark. Today, it marks the entrance to the Lion's Den. "All flights, this is lead," Moore broadcasts. "Arm weapons. Prepare to drop external tanks on my command." The clicks and clacks of charging handles echo through 71 cockpits, 6.50 caliber machine guns per aircraft, 426 guns total, 1,024,400 rounds of ammunition about to enter Japanese airspace. At 10:43 hours, Tokyo Bay appears. The city spreads below like a gray-brown carpet. Even from 10,000 feet, they can see the scars of previous B-29 raids. Entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. The LeMay firebombing campaign has transformed Tokyo into a vision of hell. Today, they're bringing more. "All flights, drop external tanks, now." 71 pairs of aluminum tanks tumble away, glinting in the morning sun like silver rain. Each Mustang immediately becomes more agile, more dangerous, more lethal. And deep in their bellies, each still carries 200 gallons of fuel. More than an hour of combat time. The Japanese have no idea what's about to hit them. Act 6. The Shock. Captain Masao Tsuyaga's Ki, 84. Hayate climbs through 12,000 feet when his world changes forever. The silver aircraft diving toward Tokyo aren't just present. They're hunting. Moving with the confidence of fighters operating from their home base, not fuel-starved survivors of an impossible journey. Tsuyaga's radio explodes with reports from across the Tokyo defense zone. Unknown fighters attacking Musashino plant. Single-engine aircraft over Yokohama. Control. They're everywhere. Major Moore leads his flight straight toward the Nakajima aircraft factory at Musashino. The massive complex sprawls across acres, churning out engines for Japanese fighters. It's been hit before by B-29s, but never by fighters with the precision to target specific buildings. Today, that changes. "Blue Flight, you've got company at 3 o'clock high." Moore spots them, 6 Japanese fighters diving from 15,000 feet. They're positioned perfectly for a slashing attack, the kind that works against fuel-starved intruders who can't afford extended combat. But these aren't normal intruders. "Blue Flight, engage at will. Make them pay for every inch." What follows is a shock to every Japanese pilot in the air. The Americans don't run, don't conserve fuel, don't break off to extend the combat. Instead, they turn into the attack with aggressive fury. Lieutenant Akira Watanabe finds himself engaged with 2 P-51Ds simultaneously. They're coordinating their attacks with practiced precision, one high, one low, scissors pattern that leaves no escape. Control, these fighters. They're not running low on fuel. How is this possible? In his cockpit, Captain John B. Hampshire grins behind his oxygen mask. His P-51D callsign Moonbeam still shows 180 gallons remaining, enough for an hour of combat, enough to teach these Japanese pilots a new kind of fear. Hampshire's wingman, Lieutenant Robert Carr, calls out, "Lead, I've got the high one." "Roger that, I'm taking low." The two Mustangs split, executing a vertical scissors that puts Watanabe in a crossfire. The Japanese pilot, brilliant and experienced, tries every trick he knows. Rolls, reverses, desperate dives, but physics doesn't care about desperation. The P-51D is faster, more powerful, and flown by pilots who have fuel to burn. Literally. Hampshire's .50 caliber find their mark. The first burst tears through Watanabe's left wing. The second walks up the fuselage toward the cockpit. The third, Watanabe's last radio transmission, is picked up by ground stations across Tokyo. They're not leaving. They're not running out of fuel. How did they get here? The answer dies with him as his Ki 61 High-End tumbles into Tokyo Bay, trailing smoke and pieces of aluminum. 3 miles away, Captain Tomojiro Ogawa, Japan's ace with 25 victories, finds himself in single combat with Major Moore himself. For 3 minutes, an eternity in aerial combat, the two aircraft dance through the sky. Ogawa's Ki 84 Hayate is theoretically superior. Better climb rate, tighter turning radius. But theory crumbles against reality. Moore deliberately sacrifices 7,000 feet of altitude, diving from 15,000 to 8,000 feet in a maneuver that burns precious fuel. Any rational long-range fighter pilot would be hoarding every drop for the journey home. Instead, Moore is trading fuel for tactical advantage with the confidence of a pilot who knows his aircraft's capabilities. Ogawa follows the dive and realizes the trap too late. The P-51's superior high-speed handling gives Moore the advantage. At 8,000 feet, Moore pulls into a climbing left turn that brings his guns to bear. 6.50 caliber machine guns fire in perfect synchronization, 3,600 rounds per minute, a stream of bullets that tears through Ogawa's left wing and fuel tank. Ogawa's last conscious thought, as his aircraft begins its final dive toward Tokyo's streets, captures the moment when Japanese air superiority dies. If they can come this far, if they can fight this long, we have already lost the war. At 11:14 hours, just 31 minutes after first contact, the engagement is over. 7 Japanese fighters shot down. 2 P-51Ds damaged but flyable. 0 losses. But the numbers don't tell the real story. The psychological impact tells the story. As Moore's formation reforms and begins the long journey home, Japanese ground control's radio traffic tells of a revolution. All units, report status. How many American fighters still operational? Control, they're withdrawing south toward their carriers. Control, there are no carriers within 500 miles. Then where are they going? The Mustangs climb back to 10,000 feet and turn south, toward Iwo Jima, 675 miles away, with 100 gallons of fuel remaining in each aircraft, enough to make it home with reserves to spare. AST-7, The New Reality. Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura survived the April 7th engagement. His Ki 84 had taken hits from .50 caliber rounds, but he nursed it back to Chofu Airfield on one engine and a prayer. That night he wrote in his diary, words that would later be discovered by historians studying Japan's final months, "Today I saw the future of air warfare, and it terrifies me. If the Americans can send fighters anywhere in our empire with fuel to spare, then nowhere is safe. The homeland is no longer protected by distance. We have spent 3 years learning to fight Americans who must turn back at our coastline. Now they come and go as they please, with fuel to hunt us like rabbits in our own sky." His words captured what every Japanese pilot now understood. The fundamental rules of aerial warfare had changed. Forever. The April 7th mission wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a psychological earthquake that shattered Japanese defensive strategy. For 3 years, Japanese pilots had exploited one simple fact: American fighters couldn't reach the home islands. This limitation shaped everything: Tactics, strategy, deployment, resource allocation. The mathematics were certain, inviolate, sacred. The P-51 Mustang obliterated that certainty in a single morning. Within days, Japanese defensive doctrine underwent desperate transformation. No longer could pilots rely on the sanctuary of distance. American fighters could now strike anywhere in the empire and return safely to Iwo Jima. The numbers tell the story of Japan's new nightmare. Between April 7th and August 15, 1945, P-51 Mustangs flew 51 very long-range missions against the Japanese home islands. These weren't tentative probing attacks. These were systematic, methodical, overwhelming demonstrations of American aerial supremacy. The missions averaged 1,350 miles round trip. Distances that should have been impossible. Distances that Japanese commanders had calculated were aerodynamically, mathematically, physically impossible. American fighters claimed 341 Japanese aircraft destroyed. They lost 62 P-51s, a kill ratio that demonstrated not just technical superiority, but complete tactical dominance. But the true devastation wasn't measured in aircraft shot down. It was measured in the collapse of Japanese pilot morale. Master Sergeant Isamu Sasaki, a veteran pilot who survived the war with 38 victories, captured this in his memoirs. After April 1945, we stopped believing we could win. We had always known the war was going badly. We saw the burned cities. We felt the hunger. We knew the Americans were coming. But we still believed in our skill as pilots. We still believed that over our own territory, we could make them pay for every mile. Then the Mustangs arrived. They came from impossible distances. They fought with impossible endurance. And we realized that even our skill, even our determination, even our willingness to die, none of it mattered anymore. If the Americans could send fighters from Iwo Jima to Tokyo with fuel to spare, what else could they do? Where could we hide? The P-51 had achieved something beyond military victory. It had broken the Japanese will to resist in the air. Consider what this meant tactically. Before April 7th, Japanese fighters could ignore American fighters and focus on destroying B-29s. After April 7th, they had to fight for their lives against escorts that could outfly, outfight, and outlast anything Japan could field. Japanese aircraft factories previously protected by geography became regular targets. The Musashino plant, the Mitsubishi works at Nagoya, the Nakajima facilities. American fighters appeared over them with precision and fury, strafing production lines, bombing assembly halls, systematically dismantling Japan's ability to resist. The psychological warfare extended beyond the pilots. Japanese civilians, who had been told the homeland was impregnable, now watched American fighters circle overhead like silver vultures. The contrails spelled Japan's doom in white letters across the sky. Captain Tomojiro Ogawa's final words, recorded by ground control before his Ki-84 crashed into Tokyo Bay, became prophetic. If they can come this far, we have already lost the war. He was right. Act 8. The Technical Miracle. To truly understand what the P-51 Mustang accomplished, you need to understand the engineering miracle that made it possible. Not just good design, revolutionary design that pushed the boundaries of what single-engine fighters could achieve. Start with the wing. The P-51's laminar flow wing wasn't just aerodynamic, it was a work of art expressed in aluminum. The airfoil maintained smooth airflow over 65% of the wing's surface, compared to 30% on conventional wings. This reduction in drag translated directly to range. Every mile per gallon mattered when the target was 675 miles away. The fuselage was sculpted around the Merlin engine like a bespoke suit, minimizing drag while maximizing cooling efficiency. The radiator scoop beneath the fuselage wasn't just functional, it actually generated thrust through clever ducting, offsetting some of the cooling drag. But the real magic was the Merlin engine. The Rolls-Royce Merlin V1650, built under license by Packard in America, represented the pinnacle of piston engine technology. Its two-stage, two-speed supercharger allowed it to maintain power output at altitudes where other engines gasped for air. At 30,000 feet, where B-29s cruised, the Merlin still produced enough power to turn the P-51 into a deadly interceptor. More critically, for very long-range missions, the Merlin achieved fuel efficiency that seemed impossible. While other engines burned 100-plus gallons per hour, the Merlin consumed just 68 gallons at cruise settings. This efficiency, combined with the Mustang's 400-gallon total capacity, created the range that shocked Japanese pilots over Tokyo. Do the math. Internal tanks, 184 gallons. 2 external drop tanks, 216 gallons, 108 each. Total fuel, 400 gallons. Consumption at cruise, 68 gallons per hour. Endurance, 5.88 hours. Range at 290 miles per hour cruise, 1,705 miles. With combat reserves and contingency fuel, the practical operational range settled at approximately 1,650 miles. Tokyo to Iwo Jima and back, 1,350 miles. Margin for error, 300 miles. Margin for combat, 1+ hour. But fuel capacity alone wasn't enough. The P-51D needed to fight when it arrived. 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 3 per wing, each loaded with 400 rounds. Total ammunition, 2,400 rounds. At 800 rounds per minute cyclic rate per gun, that's 4,800 rounds per minute when all 6 guns fired. The convergence was set at 300 yards, the sweet spot where all 6 guns' bullets intersected in a cone of destruction roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything caught in that cone died. Instantly. The P-51D's gun sight, the K-14 gyroscopic computing sight, was another technological marvel. It automatically calculated lead angle based on target movement, range, and aircraft speed. Pilots no longer had to guess deflection angles. The sight did the math, allowing pilots to focus on flying and fighting. This combination, revolutionary airframe, efficient engine, devastating armament, and advanced sighting, created something unprecedented in aviation history. A fighter that could escort bombers 700 miles from base, engage in aggressive combat, and still make it home, with fuel to spare. The Japanese had nothing comparable, nothing even close. Their fastest interceptor, the Ki-84 Hayate, was an excellent aircraft by any standard. It could outclimb the P-51 and matched it in turning radius. But its combat radius barely exceeded 400 miles. Over Tokyo, 650 miles from Iwo Jima, Ki-84s were operating at the extreme edge of their range. They could fight for minutes before fuel considerations forced withdrawal. P-51s could fight for an hour. That advantage was insurmountable, unstoppable, overwhelming. American engineering had done more than build a better fighter. They'd redefined what fighter meant. Act 9. The Human Cost. Behind every statistic, every tactical analysis, every technical specification, there were men. Young men who climbed into cockpits knowing they might not return, Japanese and American alike. Captain Masao Suyaga never made it home from the April 7th engagement. His Ki-84 Hayate was found 3 weeks later in a rice field outside Tokyo, its fuel tanks empty, its pilot dead from a single .50 caliber bullet through the heart. He was 28 years old. He left behind a wife and 2 daughters who would grow up without their father. The Japanese pilot who shot down Lieutenant William Morrison's P-51D on April 12th, Morrison's Mustang caught fire at 8,000 feet, the pilot bailing out but landing in Tokyo Bay where he drowned before rescue could arrive, was himself killed 4 days later when his Ki-61 was hit by friendly anti-aircraft fire in the confusion of another American fighter sweep. These men weren't faceless enemies. They were sons, brothers, husbands, fathers. They died in aluminum coffins over Tokyo Bay and the Pacific Ocean, fighting for causes larger than themselves. The American pilots who flew these impossible missions from Iwo Jima lived in conditions that tested human endurance. They slept in tents pitched on volcanic ash that smelled of sulfur. They ate food contaminated with the fine black sand that got into everything. They watched the Pacific crash against Iwo's shores and knew that water might be their grave if their Merlin engine failed on the long flight home. Major Robert W. Moore, who led that first very long-range mission on April 7th, flew 47 combat missions from Iwo Jima. On his 48th mission, May 28, 1945, his P-51D was hit by anti-aircraft fire over Osaka. He managed to nurse the damaged fighter back toward Iwo Jima but ran out of fuel 50 miles short of the island. He ditched in the Pacific. A submarine rescued him 3 hours later, suffering from hypothermia and shock. He survived the war, but never flew combat again. Lieutenant James McKinley, the pilot forced to turn back on April 7th due to a fuel leak, made it back to Iwo Jima with just 15 gallons remaining. 15 gallons between survival and death. He landed safely, and his crew chief found a single bullet hole in the left drop tank. Enemy fire from a Japanese fighter during the outbound leg that McKinley never even knew he'd been engaged with. McKinley flew 62 more missions. He survived the war, returned to Texas, and never spoke about his combat experiences. When he died in 1987, his family found a chest full of medals he'd never mentioned, including the Distinguished Flying Cross, twice. For Japanese pilots, the final months of the war became an extended nightmare. Master Sergeant Isamu Sasaki described it in his memoirs. Every morning we scrambled to face American fighters that could reach anywhere in our empire. Every evening fewer of us returned. We lost our experienced pilots first, men like Captain Ogawa who taught me to fly, Captain Suyaga who led our formation. Then we lost the competent ones. Then the mediocre ones. By July, we were sending up teenagers with 40 hours of training, telling them to ram B-29s because they didn't have enough fuel or ammunition to shoot them down. We called them kamikaze, divine wind. I called them sacrifices to a war already lost. The human cost extended beyond combat. Iwo Jima's conditions were brutal. Heat, humidity, volcanic sand, and primitive living conditions took their toll. Pilots suffered from heat exhaustion, dehydration, and tropical diseases. Several died not from combat but from accidents on the island. Landing accidents on damaged runways, mid-air collisions in the congested airspace around the island. Even one pilot who died from coral infection after a minor cut became septic. But they kept flying. Mission after mission after mission, because those missions saved bomber crews. Every P-51 that escorted B-29s to Tokyo and back meant fewer Superfortress crews lost to Japanese fighters. The numbers bear this out. Before April 7, 1945, B-29 losses to Japanese fighters averaged 3 to 5% per mission over the home islands. After April 7, when Mustang escorts became routine, losses dropped to under 1%. Hundreds of bomber crew members survived the war because P-51 pilots flew missions that seemed impossible. Act X, the twilight of empire. By June 1945, the psychological impact of very long-range P-51 missions had fundamentally changed Japanese defensive strategy, or rather, destroyed it. Japanese commanders faced an impossible situation. They couldn't match American range, couldn't replace lost aircraft fast enough, couldn't train pilots fast enough, couldn't manufacture enough fuel to challenge American aerial supremacy. The result was desperate improvisation that bordered on insanity. The kamikaze, divine wind, tactics that began at Leyte Gulf in October 1944 became standard by the war's final months. Not from samurai honor or fanatical devotion, but from cold calculation. A pilot with 40 hours of training couldn't dogfight a P-51 pilot with 300 hours, but he could, maybe possibly with luck, ram a B-29. The mathematics were brutal. One Japanese pilot's life traded for a B-29 and its 11-man crew? From Tokyo's perspective, that was a trade worth making. From the pilot's perspective, it was a death sentence wrapped in patriotic propaganda. Warrant Officer Kenji Fujikawa was 20 years old when he volunteered for kamikaze duty in July 1945. His training consisted of learning to take off, navigate to target area, and aim his fighter at a bomber. They didn't teach him to land. There was no point. He wrote a final letter to his family that captured the desperation of Japan's final months. "Mother, Father, please forgive me for leaving you. I know my death will cause you pain, but what else can I do? The Americans come with fighters that fly from impossible distances. They hunt us in our own sky. I am not skilled enough to fight them. I am not experienced enough to shoot them down, but I can die striking at our enemy. Perhaps my death will mean something. Perhaps it will protect you. I do not believe this, but I must try." Fujikawa died on July 28, when his Ki-43 Oscar collided with a B-29 over Nagoya. The bomber crashed with all crew killed. Fujikawa's sacrifice brought nothing but grief for his family. The P-51 pilots who witnessed these kamikaze attacks felt a mixture of contempt and pity. Captain John Hampshire, who flew 73 VLR missions from Iwo Jima, later wrote, "We watched Japanese fighters deliberately ram our bombers. At first we thought it was fanaticism. Then we realized it was desperation. They were kids, most of them. Kids with barely enough training to fly straight. They couldn't dogfight us, couldn't match our aircraft, couldn't even escape. So they died, not for honor, for nothing, because their generals had run out of options." By August 1945, Japanese aerial resistance had collapsed. P-51 pilots reported entire missions where they encountered zero opposition. The 7th Fighter Command began reassigning fighters to ground attack missions, strafing trains, bombing supply depots, destroying communication facilities. The missions were called peacetime rhubarbs, free-ranging attacks against targets of opportunity. Pilots would take off from Iwo Jima, fly 700 miles to Japan, and spend an hour hunting for anything worth destroying, then fly 700 miles home. Routine missions, impossible missions that had become routine. Lieutenant Robert Carr, who flew on that first VLR mission, April 7th, flew his final combat mission on August 13, 1945, 2 days before Japan's surrender. His formation encountered a single Ki-84 Hayate northeast of Tokyo. The Japanese pilot didn't attack, didn't engage, just flew parallel to the American formation for 30 seconds, then dove away toward the coast. Carr later wrote in his diary, "We let him go. What was the point? The war was over in everything but the paperwork. That Japanese pilot knew it. We knew it. The only people who didn't seem to know it were the generals in Tokyo who kept sending these kids up to die. I think about that pilot sometimes. Wonder if he survived the war. Wonder if he thinks about that moment when we could have killed him but didn't. Wonder if he understands that the P-51's very long-range capability didn't just win us the war, it made him irrelevant." Act 11. Legacy in Aluminum. Today, nearly 80 years later, the P-51 Mustang remains one of aviation's most recognizable aircraft. Its elegant lines and bubble canopy are iconic. Its performance is legendary. But its true legacy isn't in museums or air shows. Its legacy is in the revolution it created. The P-51 proved that with the right combination of engineering brilliance and tactical innovation, the impossible becomes inevitable. It proved that technological superiority can fundamentally alter the course of warfare. It proved that sometimes one aircraft can change everything. The very long-range missions from Iwo Jima to Tokyo rewrote military doctrine that persists today. The concept of strategic reach, the ability to project power across vast distances, dominates modern warfare. When American F-15s fly nonstop from the United States to the Middle East with aerial refueling, they're executing the same strategic principle the P-51 pioneered in 1945. When stealth fighters appear over targets that believe themselves safe, they're delivering the same psychological shock the P-51 delivered over Tokyo. The aircraft itself was retired from frontline service in 1957, replaced by jets, but its influence never retired. Every long-range fighter since, F-4 Phantom, F-14 Tomcat, F-15 Eagle, F-22 Raptor, incorporates lessons learned from the P-51 success. Range matters, endurance matters, the ability to fight far from home matters. In April 2018, researchers using advanced sonar located the wreckage of Lieutenant William Morrison's P-51D in Tokyo Bay. The fighter that was shot down on April 12, 1945, had rested in the silt for 73 years. Morrison's family finally had closure. His daughter, who was 2 years old when he died, visited Japan to see the wreck site. She was 75. She said, "My father died doing the impossible. Flying a single-engine fighter 700 miles from home to fight for something he believed in. I never knew him, but I understand what the P-51 meant. It meant American pilots could protect each other anywhere in the world. It meant bomber crews had a chance to come home. It meant the war could be won. That's why he died. That's why I'm proud." Major Robert W. Moore, who led that first very long-range mission on April 7, 1945, survived the war. He returned to California, worked as a test pilot for North American Aviation, and lived to be 87 years old. Before he died in 2009, he gave one final interview about the VLR missions. People asked me if we understood the historical significance of what we were doing, flying 700 miles to Tokyo and back. The answer is no. We were just doing our jobs. We were protecting the bomber crews. That's all we thought about. But yeah, we knew we were doing something special. We knew the Japanese thought it was impossible. And we knew that every time we appeared over Tokyo with fuel to spare, we were breaking their will to fight. Not through brutality, through impossibility. We were showing them that nowhere was safe. That distance didn't protect them anymore. That's a terrible thing to realize about your enemy, that they can reach you anywhere, anytime, and you can't stop them. The 7 battle stars awarded to the 7th Fighter Command for their operations from Iwo Jima tell part of the story. The Distinguished Service Medals, the Silver Stars, the Distinguished Flying Crosses tell more. But the real story is simpler. Young men did the impossible because it needed to be done. Epilogue. Impossibility made routine. Captain Masao Suyaga's question, "How did they get here?" echoes through history. Not because it was complicated, because the answer was simple. They got there through engineering brilliance, through tactical innovation, through industrial might, through determination, through 400 gallons of fuel and 675 miles of ocean and sky. They got there because Americans decided the impossible was just another engineering problem waiting to be solved. The Silver Mustangs that appeared over Tokyo on April 7, 1945, didn't just win air battles. They shattered assumptions. They broke strategies. They proved that with the right combination of technology and will, any barrier could be overcome. The P-51's very long-range capability didn't just change how aerial warfare was conducted. It changed what was possible. It redefined the meaning of strategic reach. It demonstrated that sanctuary based on distance was an illusion waiting to be shattered. Today, when you see a P-51 Mustang at an air show, engine roaring, propeller blurring, that distinctive bubble canopy glinting in the sun, remember what it represents. Not just a beautiful aircraft, not just a piece of history. Remember that it represents the moment when American fighters appeared 700 miles from home and hunted with fuel to spare. Remember the shock on Japanese pilots' faces when the impossible arrived overhead. Remember the bomber crews who survived because Mustangs escorted them. Remember Captain Suyaga, who died asking a question he never got answered. Remember Lieutenant Watanabe, who couldn't comprehend how Americans had fuel for extended combat. Remember Warrant Officer Fujikawa, who died because his commanders had run out of options. Remember Major Moore, who led 72 silver aircraft across an ocean to prove that distance no longer protected Japan. Remember that the P-51 Mustang didn't just dominate the skies over Japan. It redefined what domination meant. And remember that sometimes impossibility is just another word for not yet. The P-51 Mustang's very long-range missions from Iwo Jima to Tokyo transformed impossible into inevitable. 1,650 miles of range, 675 miles to the target. Enough fuel to fight for an hour and still come home. Democracy made wings, and those wings reached Tokyo.